So.
Welcome, everyone, to Deep Space Pride, a gay Star Trek podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Johnson Lee, live from Manhattan, New York, and with me is Mike Thurlow, my co-host, live from Honolulu.
Hi,
Hey,
everybody. Hey, Johnson.
Hey, how's it going in Hawaii?
It is great. It's early here. It's 8:30 in the morning.
I understand. Thank you for your sacrifice to this podcast.
Well, it's good to be here.
How's your trip been so far? You've been there for what, 3 days, 2 days?
Yeah, this is day 3, and it's been great. It was a little bit of a struggle getting here. It took us 24 hours to get here. So
suboptimal.
Yeah, that was a long time, but we made it, and we are enjoying it. And yeah, it's great. It's beautiful here. It's peaceful. It's relaxing. It's awesome. So
definitely a change of pace from Manhattan. That's for sure.
Very different. Very different. Yes.
Yeah.
Much. People are really friendly here. New York is not known for its friendliness, but
I'm friendly. I'm from New York. I don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, in general,
has that been the highlight so far? The friendly people.
No, I mean, no. The warm weather, the sun, the breeze. It's just all been really great. It's putting your feet in sand and swimming in the Pacific Ocean. It's been really great. Yeah.
None of those things are for me. I'm like,
no,
sun,
I know those
sand,
are not your things.
Salt water. I'm like, where's the concrete? I mean, get me there.
Yeah, no, it's
the sun.
Super great here. We joke, but we might move here. Who knows?
That would be a bit of a move. That would be
a huge move. Yeah, definitely. But we're loving it here. Vacation is going well, and we still have plenty of more days here and then elsewhere. So
cool.
Hi, Sci-Fi Sisters. By the way.
Hey. So Mike, we are here live to talk about what it means to be choosing a family and how we see that in Star Trek Discovery. So you came up with this topic. So why don't you tell our viewers and listeners what exactly we'll be talking about?
Yeah. I came up with this theme around chosen family. I think it's definitely a theme that all LGBTQ plus people experience in some way, shape, or form, having to build a family out of both need and community and necessity. And mainly that comes from just facing rejection after coming out or, to your family. So you kind of have to build your own community to support you. And so as we watched season 3 of Discovery, it was really cool to see this kind of being played out, especially since the crew of Discovery goes 930 years into the future. And there are, 88 of them or whatever, and they are all that they know. And So this idea of just building a chosen family, and also we get to see it with some of the other characters that we're going to talk about today. So there's that, and I also think that there's this other piece that is really important for LGBTQ plus people, and it's this idea of feeling seen, right?
Right.
So I did a little research on where this whole idea of feeling seen comes from, and I've shared on the podcast before that I really felt seen in the first season of Discovery when Hugh and Paul are brushing their teeth together in their quarters.
Right.
And that was like a moment of feeling seen for me. And I think it continues to grow. And I've shared on the podcast, Dennis and I are in the process of adopting. So there is also the idea of what happens with Paul and Hugh and Adira and hopefully in season 4, Gray. So, but just this idea of feeling seen is, it's a basic human need, believe it or not. And it comes from an evolutionary standpoint, because if your tribe didn't see you, then there was a risk that you would be left behind, that you'd be abandoned, and eventually you would die. So this is something that's been in the ancient part of our human brains for thousands, forever. So, there's that piece of it that I think Discovery is really doing well, is this idea of building a found family. And so yeah, that's where it all kind of came from. And
yeah. And actually, speaking of Discovery season 3, I know that Mike, you had a chance to do a little bit of interview with Doug Jones, and you talked a little bit about this too, right? Not to spoil the beans because we haven't released that interview yet, but you talked a little bit about even for his character, even though he's not in the LGBTQ plus family specifically, he's able to also partake in this idea of chosen and found family through his experience on Discovery too. So it's not just people in our community. I would say it's honestly anyone in that Discovery family is going through this experience.
Yeah, Doug was really awesome to interview. I can't wait to share that with everyone. It was a short interview, but it was great. He's such an awesome guy. And he shared that, from Saru's standpoint, Saru has this paternal feel, this paternal role to fulfill in building this family and taking care of the crew, both personally and as the captain of Discovery. And so it's really cool to hear that. I wasn't expecting that answer. And it was great to hear him share that. So yeah, you're right. I think that, anyone can kind of experience that if you are on the margins or been, I think also the whole idea that as I was preparing to kind of really talk about this, I forgot that Adira was an orphan, or it hadn't occurred, it hadn't really come up.
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll apologize now. So some of the early references in the season, especially when Hugh and Paul are talking about Adira, they refer to her as she until the scene when Adira basically tells Paul that they want to be referred to as they, them. So if I slip into that she part, hopefully I'll only do that when I'm talking about the early part of the season. But the fact that she's an orphan, I think that's another example of having to build a found family. But it didn't seem like she really did. She joined the Earth Force. She was pretty young when she joined, or the Earth Defense Force. And so, it's just another reminder that, not only do LGBTQ plus people need to find and create a family, that also, people who are orphans and maybe their family has passed away, have to create their own families as well. And so this is a really, I think Discovery does this really well. And it's, it actually, as I rewatched almost the entire season in the last week or so, I was picking up on that even more and more as I kind of, realized it. So But
Right. Totally.
you know, for the both of us, we've created our found families as well. So, you know, I guess my question for you, Johnson, is what does found family mean to you, and how has that played out in your life?
Yeah, totally. So I think for me, I grew up in a conservative home, a conservative Asian religious home. So I think that there are a lot of expectations and restrictions particularly when it came to my parents' expectations of me, what my future would look like, particularly when it came to things that relate to family, things that relate to marriage. And I didn't come out till a little bit later for me. I came out to myself in college, and then I slowly came out over time to friends. And I didn't come out to my parents until, I would say, at this point, it's been probably 7 or 8 years ago. And I think that it's really been a journey for me, as it is for all of us. I think for those that need to kind of they aren't able to meet the expectations of their family or their community, I think that there's always the matter of having to have this conversation to be able to look like, I'm not going to be able to be who you want me to be. And that's always a hard conversation to have. And yeah, I think that over time for me, it was really about forming a loving community that understood me. And a lot of the people that knew me, particularly when I was younger or even high school and college, a lot of them had certain expectations of me as well when it came to my gender identity, my sexuality. And a lot of them didn't quite know what to do with me once I did come out to them. They didn't know what to say, particularly those in religious circles. I do have to say that my experience was, I think, relatively tame compared to some other people's experiences, where I wasn't rejected in any way. People weren't like, you're going to hell. Like there wasn't anything like that. They were sympathetic, but they didn't really understand. They didn't really relate, and they didn't know what to say. And I wouldn't have expected that from them. I think for a time, for me, that was okay. Like just having these people that didn't quite understand me, didn't understand what I was going through, but they were sympathetic, they were empathetic, they were nice. For a time, that was well and good. But eventually, as I came out more to more people, and as I accepted my identity as a gay man more and more, I realized that I needed more than just some acceptance. I needed affirmation. I needed people that really loved me and supported me for who I was, and wasn't just like, oh, it's okay that you're gay. I needed more than that. And that's when I started to really gravitate to those friends that really celebrated what my identity was, and they really celebrated the idea that I could explore and make choices that aren't what they were expecting, or just make mistakes along the way. And it was really helpful to find that kind of community and find those kind of friends that were able to support me in that way. And I think that that's really where I think just over time, those friends became best friends, and those friends became closer to me than my family members, where I could just be open and honest with them. Whereas, for example, when I came out to my parents, they were surprised. They were very surprised. I dropped hints, and I was like very surprised that they had no idea. But it simply wasn't. There was this like cultural disconnect and disparity between the way that we thought, and they were just like, "Where's this coming from?" And yeah, it was for them. They just didn't know what to say. My mom told me, and my mom's the sweetest woman, but my mom told me that it would have been easier for you to tell me that you were dying than for you to tell me that you're gay, because she didn't know how to process it. She has dealt with death in her life, so she knows how to deal with it. She knows how to confront it. She knows what it means. But when it came to me being gay, she didn't know how to deal with that. And the problem is she also doesn't have and I'm sympathetic towards her situation. She doesn't have the support system that can help her in this way either. She doesn't feel comfortable telling her family, her friends that I'm gay. So she doesn't know who to talk to. And even like a couple weeks ago, she was talking about this like young girl she met, and she was like, "Oh, do you want to talk to this girl?" I'm like, "Are you?" I was like, I can't deal with this right now. I've already come out to her like a couple of times. She knows I'm gay, but I just don't need that kind of thinking in my life, and I wasn't ready to kind of do this whole thing again. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna be like, let's move on. So I think that those experiences and those conversations have really led me to a point where the idea of found/chosen family for me is really just about finding people that affirm who I am, affirm my identity, and celebrate my identity, and not just accept it, and also encourage me through their words, their actions, that they know what I'm going through. So yeah, that's my experience, I would say, and we all have very different experiences. I do have to say, again, I said this earlier, like I think that my experience was relatively tame compared to the experiences that I've heard from some other people. And nevertheless, I think that my found family is definitely one of the most important aspects of the community that I have here in New York. So, but Mike, yeah, I also want to hear about your story and your whole process.
Yeah, I've shared before, I think, but I mean, I grew up in a religious family as well, and didn't really know how to process being gay or having an understanding of what that was until much later in my life. So I even went the path of getting married to a woman, and then obviously when I came out, getting a divorce and leaving that. And also, when that happened, leaving behind everyone and everything that I knew at that point. So it wasn't also just coming out. It was also leaving it all behind and just venturing out on my own. And it's, I'm trying to think back then, I had a few people, well, the person who stuck by me right away was my sister. So, I am very close to my sister, deeply indebted to her, just on a level of her being there when I needed her. But also, the relationship we've had, we've been close growing up all throughout our lives, and we probably did diverge a little bit when I was in college and she was in high school, but. My sister is one of the most important people in my life, and her kids are essentially my kids. They're that important to me, and honestly, like when Dennis and I have, adopt our kid, I can't wait for them to meet our kid and vice versa. Like it's just that kind of relationship with my sister and their family, and also just to also shout out my brother-in-law. My sister's husband, he and his family were amazing. Like actually, he and his family knew before my family.
Mm-hmm.
So that was and they were very open. So they had an uncle who was gay, and so they were they had the experience of that and of loving that person. And so his family was and is still very I'm still very close to all of them and part of that family. So that was really amazing. So my parents actually were the last people to kind of know that I was gay or for me to come out to.
Yeah, same.
I did. So when I did come out, when I first did come out, I knew that I also couldn't control the story. Like I couldn't control who knew. So when I did actually come out to my parents, my mom said she already knew. So I because it was such an intense time for me when I did it, and I only did this like, I don't know, 6 years ago, maybe even less than that. So a really long time I waited. One, because I didn't need the acceptance, but I felt at some point that I needed to move through that and past that, sort of a point of growth for me, to kind of just close the loop and just live fully. So I never really asked, like, how did she know, or when did she know, or anything like that. So I don't really know the details, but obviously, the minute I got divorced, that was sort of out of my control. So I don't know exactly when she found out, but but throughout that process of coming out and leaving that behind, I did have my sister, and then I started to make friends as I entered into the dating world. I met friends of people who I went on dates with, or whatever. And one of probably the most important relationships in that early part of the time, and I'm still, he's still one of my best friends, was his name is Don. He actually had the similar experience, and this is one of the qualities I'm going to share in as we talk through discovery, is this idea that you have similar experiences, or you see something similarly, like a similar experience or a similar quality or gift in someone, and that's the bond. That's the initial thing that starts to build the bond. So Don was there to kind of be my mentor in a lot of the same ways that Paul is there for Adira as their mentor. So I think that's part of the experience of having and creating a found family, is this idea that you kind of need a mentor, or someone who's been along the road to kind of help you along the way. So that was really important for me early on, especially as I said, like I kind of left a whole life behind in order to come out. So it's that's sort of my experience. And then as I got to know Don, and he introduced me to his friend group, then those relationships started to bond. And that's also why even though having lived in New York for over 10 years now, I still refer to Boston as my home. But when I'm up there, I refer to New York as my home. So it's
so funny.
Like I'm sort of a place. I'm still of a place where I have kind of multiple homes, I guess,
and maybe Hawaii. We may
and maybe Hawaii too. Yeah. So.
Cool. So I think that is a good segue into our conversation about discovery. And I think that one of the ways that we want to have this conversation, so that it's not all over the place, because we can talk about all these characters and how they all, and it's not just, as we were saying earlier, it's not just an LGBTQ experience. It's an experience that a lot of people have to go through. And we're just trying to see it through a specific lens. I think that what we wanted to do was really hone in on a couple of character relationships and how we relate to them in some shape or form. So, Mike, do you want to go first?
I can. Sure. Yeah. I mean, as I said, I've rewatched most of season 3 of Discovery.
Yeah, I tried to rewatch some of it this week in preparation for this recording, but yes. You watched basically the whole season. Good for you.
Yeah, I was sort of doing double duty with this, because I was preparing for this, but I also wanted it fresh in case.
Oh, your conversation with Doug. That's right.
Doug, yeah. So I was sort of kind of doing it from both aspects, but so I think, like I said, I'm going to talk through like a number of qualities of a found family. Or a chosen family. I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. But as I've already said, the common experiences and our qualities is a key part of building a found family. And we see that right away with Adira and Paul.
Right.
Well, Paul is, and this is obviously in episode 3, People of Earth. And we see Paul annoyed at what's going on in his engineering room, right? But also then curious enough to follow and follow Adira and find out what they're doing. And once he finds them, I think it's really cool how they have this conversation walking down the corridor, and usually he's a little bit humbled because he's like, I'm usually the smartest person in the room, because she basically tells him everything about the spore drive in 30 seconds. So right. They're incredibly smart, and I think that Paul sees that immediately, sees himself in them, right. And that sort of builds this bond that they have. So that's where it kind of starts, and I think that later on in the show, and obviously, as I was watching this, as I was watching this season, it's obviously this is sort of the subtext, or the as we've said before, sort of the B story of the season, I would say. But because obviously Michael and the Discovery crew right. in the 32nd century is sort of the main, and the Emerald Chain and all of that is sort of the A plot of all of it. It
definitely comes to the forefront towards the end, though, once they are trying to figure out this whole burn situation. Like that's really where it kind of pops out. Yeah.
I
mean, they do a good job of kind of peppering in and kind of laying the foundation for that relationship, as you're saying.
Yeah, but it's in little snippets here and there. So
right.
it would almost be nice to kind of like cut all those scenes together and just create a little
a super cut. Like a super cut
exactly.
It's
super.
But you have like 30 seconds from this episode, nor 30 seconds from another episode.
Yeah. Because it comes back, so the next episode I'm going to talk about is episode 6, Scavengers. And, again, Adira is showing their skills and their intelligence. I mean, this is clearly, they are a brilliant engineer, person, human, whatever you want to, call them. But they redesigned the spore chamber for Paul, first of all. And that also builds on their relationship, right? So Adira has done something really nice for Paul in changing his life, and that continues throughout the episode because they also help remove the stunts from Paul's arm. But it's also so it's again more of this seeing someone do something nice for you and wanting to again share that, do something nice for them, and that actually comes out in Paul and Hugh's conversation in their quarters later on in that episode. So it's and it's really cool. I really love that conversation between Paul and Hugh. Because Paul shares that they trusted, and this is where I really picked up on it. The use of pronouns here. So Paul in this conversation uses a lot of the she, her pronouns in this conversation with Hugh, and it's not until 2 episodes later where Adira actually says to Paul, "I prefer they, them."
Right.
So
everyone leading up to the Trill episode, which is that when? Yes, never mind. The Trill episode is what I'm thinking about, because in that episode, remember, Michael was specifically referring to Adira, because that's when Michael brought Adira to Trill to figure out the whole symbiote situation. Michael specifically referred to Adira as she, and I made a note of that because, again, leading up to this whole season, Paramount did a huge PR push when it came to how this season would feature a non-binary character and a trans character. So I made a mental note of that because leading up to the entire season, I was very curious as to how this coming out scene was going to be happening. So I did notice that basically everything leading up to the conversation that Adira had with Paul, where Adira came out, everyone referred to Adira as she, and then after that it changed. So it was interesting, like how they decided to like evolve that.
Yeah, and then when you go back and watch that, having known all that and seen the season play out, It's it's definitely it's even more noticeable, right?
Right.
It's definitely easy to pick up on. But I really loved Paul and Hugh's conversation just around how Hugh kind of calls out and says, "Does Adira remind you of anyone?" and this whole idea that Paul and Adira share so many qualities.
Right.
From having, because Paul says, she's brilliant and she has a hard time reaching out to people. And again, this is before the pronoun change, or her expressing her preferred pronouns, and also they have this relationship because, and it comes out in the mess hall scene, but where Paul realizes that Adira and he have a similar experience in the fact that they loved someone who died. And for Paul, that's a huge, he says he never thought he would meet another person who has experienced this in this similar situation. So, I mean, it's quite, it's really, if you watch and pay attention to this evolving relationship, it's really awesome to see how lovingly this is done, from the writer's standpoint, but also from the actor's standpoint. And then you move on, move into episode 8, The Sanctuary, and you see Adira kind of almost cringe at the fact that Paul uses she, and then very confidently, but also a little bit trepidatiously, I would say, they say, "I would prefer they." And it's so it's really great that happens, and that Adira also shares that they had not shared that with anyone except for Gray. So Paul is the only other person. And so this other quality that I think is really important to point out with a found family is this idea of acceptance for who we are. And you mentioned that in your story. I think that's one of the cornerstones of a found family, is having people around you who accept you for who you are. At a very I don't know what the word is that I want to use, but at a very base level, right?
I think that one of the things you said earlier when it came to Paul and Adira and that mess hall scene, where they kind of I think they both realized how much they had in common, not only in their experiences, in their engineering know-how and knowledge, but then also the fact that they both went through trauma in a very similar way. This is where I think Star Trek really shines. It's where they use these like sci-fi fantasy elements to create these like crazy scenarios, because Paul basically had Hugh die on him and come back to life, while Adira had what's his name?
Anthony, or who are we talking about?
No. Adira had
Gray.
Blue, basically. Yes, Gray. I was like blue. I was like, it's another color. Yes, thank you. Had Gray die, but then essentially come back. I thought that was so interesting, that they both basically had to go through that trauma, but then they had their partners come back to life, essentially. So I thought that was really interesting, and that because of that, not only their backgrounds, their experience, but then also their experiences with their loved ones, that they were able to relate on that level, and they were able to connect on that basis. I think is just another great way that Star Trek develops a character relationship in a way that wouldn't really operate in the real world, but it's still relatable.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a little bit about the basis, the basis of their relationship. Before we kind of go to the end of the season and talk about kind of the trauma of almost losing and the whole Michael and Paul situation that happens towards the end of the season. Let's talk a little bit about the characters that you see this found family forming in.
Yeah. So the characters that I picked were Philippa Giorgio and Michael Burnham. And Philippa obviously is not at the forefront. I mean, we do discover in season 1 that she's pansexual. But that's not really, that's not really a major thing they talk about. It was just like, she's just like kind of, she doesn't really have too many preferences. She's not particularly picky when it comes to gender. So, she basically enjoys whoever she wants to enjoy. So that's at least the character that we're presented with in season 1. And I'm talking about, so when I refer to Philippa Giorgio in this podcast, I'm going to be referring to the mirror Philippa Giorgio rather than Prime. If I'm talking about Prime, I'll supposed to say Prime. Otherwise, I'll be saying Mirror Giorgio the whole time, Emperor Giorgio the whole time. So I do have to say that, I wish we got a little bit more of Prime Giorgio. Obviously, we only got that character in the pilot. There are some flashbacks throughout the seasons, but in terms of her relationship with Michael, we only get a little bit of that in the pilot. If anything, we see it be contentious because Michael basically stabs Philippa in the back, Prime Philippa in the back during the encounter with the Klingons, and that whole relationship just falls apart. And we don't really see much of the setup other than like the Zezer scene in the teaser of the pilot. That's really the only moment where we see Philippa and Michael kind of, we see a little bit of banter. We get some glimpses into their past relationship and where they've been. But for the most part, we don't really see much of that. So I do wish we get a little bit more of that. I think we get some of that in some of the novels, but I don't count those because it's like, are those canon or not? So what we do understand from that is that Michael does see Philippa as a mother figure, being orphaned, having orphaned. We obviously know later that her mother is not dead. But we do come to understand that she really regrets how everything kind of panned out at the end of their relationship, and how Philippa died without Michael being able to reconcile with her. So then once we meet Mirror Giorgio in season 1, that was just a really interesting setup. Again, this like whole, like, this is where, again, sci-fi, Star Trek really gives us this opportunity to revisit a dead character that we didn't know was coming back. Obviously, that can't really happen in real life, but it's like this unreconciled relationship that fell apart. And now there is this opportunity to recultivate that relationship and also to bring to terms that relationship. We just don't get that in real life. If someone dies in our life and that and there are things that are unspoken, there really isn't an opportunity for us to do that. And here Michael is presented with an opportunity to make things right with Philippa. And I think it's just really interesting how their relationship evolves over season 1 to season 3. Particularly, we get Philippa in snips and pieces throughout season 1 to season 3. So she's not like always there, but I do think that what is really interesting to me is not only Michael's relationship with Philippa and how she makes these attempts and these efforts to save Mirror Philippa, because again, she feels indebted to Prime Philippa, but also how Mirror Philippa changes over time, particularly in season 3 and in the Terra Prime 2-parter, where the thing is, like, honestly, Philippa is like a total, like, she's a total meanie. I'm trying to be sensitive what I'm saying on this live stream, by the way, because usually we're like explicit in our podcast. So I'm also like censoring myself. So I'm like, I'm not going to say anything bad about Philippa, but she's a meanie. She's very honest and she's mean, and she is not the nicest person. And I wish we got to see a little bit more of her evolution, but we do see in Terra Prime parts 1 and 2 how much her experience with Michael has changed her. Prime Michael has changed her. Because when we see her revisit the mirror universe, she wants to save Michael. Like, she wants to do the same thing to Michael that Michael wanted to do for her. And it's this reciprocity that we didn't expect, but it just speaks to how much Michael has changed her, even on a subliminal basis, on a very subconscious basis, where Philippa is like, you don't even know how better the universe can be, because I've seen it. And she wants to actually make an effort to change Michael and save Michael because of her experience as Prime Michael. And I think that, I've always found that relationship to be fascinating because, I think that this is in a very similar way. Like, and this is, again, an adopted family, a chosen family, because Philippa adopted Michael in the mirror universe and the Prime universe. You can say, you can look at it both ways. Michael adopts Philippa once she basically forces Philippa to come to the Prime universe. And this, again, is family by choice. It's not like something that is necessarily of their choosing in the way that it's biological, but they make the choice to actually make this family unit happen. And I think it is just really interesting how people can affect other people in such interesting and different ways, even on a subconscious level, and make them better. Because in this case, I think that it takes Mirror Giorgio to go back to the Terran universe to realize how much she's changed, and that she wants to be better, and she wants to be the Philippa that Michael knows and loves. And I love the last scene of the two-parter Terra Prime episode where Michael tells, it's like right before Philippa steps into the Guardian Forever, and Michael says to her that, my experience with you, my love for you is for you. Because, like, I think Philippa in her mind was like, oh, your love for me is for Prime Michael. It's for Prime Philippa, not for me. But then Michael's last words of assurance to her was like, no, it is, my love for you is for you. It belongs to you. And I think that is something that we as people in the LGBTQ community hear too, where, as I said this earlier, it's like, it's not just a matter of even acceptance. It's a matter of affirmation. And it's a matter of, I love you for who you are and not what you think. It's not even a matter of what you think you are. It's I'm loving you for who you are, just for you, and it's not even what you think my idea of you is. It's literally for you. And I think that honestly, everyone needs to be able to hear that. Everyone needs to be able to hear that. But I think that as gay people on the outskirts, people who are on the fringes, being able to hear that, someone loves us for who we are, just as we come, it's just so important. And that's why I picked their relationship, and my relationship with my parents. I don't know. It's they definitely love me, but I don't ever think that they would say that personally. I don't ever. My father passed away last year, and he never got a chance to say that. I don't think my mother would say that or anything like that. I can't imagine her saying something like that because of the disconnect that we have, particularly when it comes to my sexuality rather. So I think that is just something, again, where sci-fi is able to just deliver something to us that is just so powerful because we are able to connect to it just through metaphor and analogy, right? And even though, again, like, this is not like an LGBTQ relationship or anything, neither of them, again, Philippa is, in that pansexual category. that's just not, that's not the forefront of what their relationship is, but they're able to find that connection, that where they're able to affirm each other in such a specific way that I think is really powerful. So,
yeah, I would totally agree. I think that I'm in the same boat as you. I think that my mom specifically loves me for who she thinks I am or who she wants me to be, and not who I necessarily am. So I totally get that. And I don't know how my father feels. He's not one to talk about his emotions. But he has said, I love you. And he said it certainly after I came out. So that was powerful enough at that time. But, one of the things, when you said that, I was thinking that's actually one of the, how do I want to say this? That's one of the bases, I don't know. One of the bases of my relationship with Dennis is the fact that we love each other for who we are, which is why, as in a couple, on a vacation, I don't, this is my hobby, but this is also time away from him. And he was, very supportive of me doing this podcast and also doing the interview. And he said, I will never stop you from you doing you. And so, I think that's something that we all need to hear. And this is the first relationship that I've been in where I actually truly feel accepted for who I am. And I accept him for who he is. And it's just, that is such a strong foundational piece of our relationship that is why I think we work so well together. And but as you were talking through that with Philippa and Michael, really powerful. And I just watched that end scene last night.
Look at you.
Well, yeah, where she walks through the Garden of Forever. So, that is a powerful statement to say that I love you for who you are. So, So where do we want to go from here?
Oh, I don't know. I thought you had more to say.
Well, you? I do a little bit towards the end. Towards the end of the season, right? In episode 12, there was a tide. So the penultimate episode. One of the things that really stood out to me is the scene with Paul and Aurelio, where Aurelio is kind of sharing like, Osira did this. She brought me out of all of this. I now have a family.
Okay, thank you. I was like, for a minute, I was like, oh yeah, who's Aurelio? I remember. He's the scientist, right?
Yeah, Ken Mitchell. So the amazing Ken Mitchell, who, has played up until this point all Klingons, right? So
right. Yeah. He's done a lot of stints on Star Trek.
He is Klingon extraordinaire, right? But he, the key thing that Paul says, which is, I think the first time he says it, he tells Aurelio, "I have a child myself, and I'm very concerned about them and my partner." And again, that's another point where feeling seen. I mean, that's just powerful words. But I think that's the first point where Paul kind of identifies, this is my family. You have your family, you have your Orion wife, you have your Orion kids, or your kids, and so do I. And as a gay person hearing that being said on Star Trek, wow, just a powerful statement, which, later on in that episode just turns it upside down when Michael basically shoots him out of Discovery, and he's literally screaming at the top of his lungs saying, we followed you here. I mean, he is just attacking her verbally, and the pain that she feels, but also the pain that Paul is feeling at potentially having to sacrifice his family again.
Right.
And we see that in the finale. He's not quite over that. You can see as Captain Burnham walks onto the bridge, there is no look of love.
I know, there's just some like side eye. I'm kind of excited to see where they take that.
Where they take that, yeah.
Not only with honestly, obviously the family that we have between Adira, Stamets, Hugh, and Gray, but also like just that tension of having that family, but then also still, I think the thing with Star Trek that's always been interesting, and honestly, most of the series have not really done too well and done much of, is showing how a family unit functions on a starship. And we see a little bit of that. We see some of that in the Next Generation with Dr. Crusher and Wesley, but honestly, there's only a few episodes where we see that happening. And then we've probably seen that the most is probably Deep Space Nine with Ben Sisko and Jake. That's standout relationship, up to this point. I'm interested to see how they function as a family and also what they do with Gray's character. I apologize for not remembering. I was like, is his name Blue? But that's his real life.
No, Ian Alexander.
It's also a color. I'm like,
yeah.
It's very confusing.
Yes.
No, but yes, Blue Alexander's character, Gray, and how he is going to be seen.
Right, yeah.
But then that tension with Michael too. Michael being now captain, and having to make specific sacrifices when you're in a command structure. You're not always going to be able to protect your family. You're going to, especially if your whole family is serving in Starfleet. I we'll have to see what kind of situations that comes up, like what kind of conflict comes up from that. I am very interested to see that.
And I also think it was great to see Hugh get to see Gray, right? So there's this on the one hand, Paul has never seen Gray but believes that he is alive, or in some form alive, whereas Hugh has actually gotten to see Gray as a Vulcan, but as an existence.
Close
right?
enough. Close enough.
Yeah. So I think that they're both going to be invested in figuring out how they can help Gray become real, or essentially what Paul did in going into the mycelial network, right, and pulling Hugh out of that and saving Hugh. So, I think it's going to be great to see how that grows. You and I have said multiple times on our podcast that we, oh man, that thought totally left my brain. I totally lost it. Don't know where I was going with that.
Well,
but it'll come back. But yeah, I'm excited to see where this found family goes in season 4. And I also learned that they're still filming season 4, believe it or not. So that was one tidbit that Doug did share, that they are still up there wrapping up the season, and that he won't be at Star Trek Las Vegas / the 55-year mission, which is a bummer. And it doesn't sound like, it sounds like the only person who may make it for a day is Sonequa. So if you anyone who's watching or listening to this, if you are going to the 55-year mission tour in Las Vegas next month, Sonequa may be one of the few people from Discovery there.
But they have like 100 cast members on the list. So
yeah, I mean, I haven't gone back and looked at who's there, but yeah. So we're getting towards the end of this hour of ours. The one other thing too that that really stood out to me is that Paul yells at Michael and says, "My whole life is in the nebula," and she's basically kicking him out of the ship for that. I hope that they resolve it. I hope that there's, not too much tension. There's enough tension to make it a good payoff. But I also think that one of the things about a relationship is certainly with Paul and Hugh is that Hugh is sort of Paul is actually the more emotional one in the relationship, and Hugh is the more like steady going.
He's very calm.
Yeah, he's much more like likes to think things through, and and also has the perspective that he gives to Paul, which I'm sure is going to come up you have to make choices as a captain or as a commander trying to save the universe as we know it. So, but yeah, that's really all I think I had to say about A Found Family and Discovery. What about you? Anything else you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think we cover most of it. I think that there's definitely a lot. Again, I think that we wanted to really hone the conversation that we were going to have with just by focusing on like specific characters and because again, I think that there's so many different ways for us to be discussing the idea of chosen or found family in Star Trek in general. I mean, we focus specifically on Discovery, but you can really say that across any of these series, there is this idea that the crew becomes a found family or chosen family, and I think that there's so many different ways for us to examine those different relationships. There's a plethora of that on Deep Space Nine, which is our favorite series.
Okay, yeah.
We can talk about that for days, probably. I think that, Discovery honestly is where, as you said earlier, I think that we decided to focus on that because that's really where we as folks who are in the LGBTQ community have really started to see more representation. So we decided to focus on Discovery specifically. But there's so much to say about honestly any of these characters across all these different Star Trek shows, and how even Picard, like that last scene in All Good Things where he finally he goes to
the poker table
game.
Yeah,
I can talk about that.
Yeah,
like that's where he realizes that this is his family. And
when he goes to Nepenthe and in Picard season 1, he goes to where his family,
right,
where he knows he'll get support. It's he's in trouble. It's kind of like the kid going. It's the reverse though, because Picard was always the older person who,
right,
the father figure, and now he's sort of like the kid who's in trouble going home to his parents for support and help. So
so I think there's a lot of found family situations that we will be able to examine in Star Trek. But again, since we just have the hour, we're going to keep it to Star Trek Discovery, and see what we can cultivate there. So anyway, I think that pretty much does it for our conversation.
Yeah, and we want to thank everybody who's been watching and listening. I've been reading the comments through, and thanks for the participation. It's been great to see
comments.
No, I know. I
this
know
live stream is so new for me, so I'm like,
yeah,
I'm just going to not look at it because I'm.
Yeah, it's a little distracting when you're trying. I'm trying to pay attention to what you're saying and bounce off of you, and then trying to keep up with the conversation in the chat. But thanks everybody for watching and for listening. Johnson, do you want to tell everybody where they can find us?
Yeah, so we occasionally post on social media. I'm our social media manager, and I also do social media in real life, which means that sometimes I get triggered by having to manage our Deep Space Pride accounts. So you'll be like, oh, he's posting about an episode that was posted like a week ago. What's up with that? I apologize. But you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Deep Space Pride. So we post pretty much consistently on a weekly basis. So we post on Fridays. So if anyone is interested in listening to our podcast, you're more than welcome to, and shoot us a comment on social media or DM us. And you can also reach us through email, just through emailing us at deepspacepride@gmail.com, and we'll be sure to respond to you.
And if you want to reach out to either one of us, This is Mike's World on Instagram, and it is Mike's World on Twitter.
Yeah, it's confusing that you have two different handles.
It's only because This is Mike's World is not actually available on Twitter.
I understand. Okay, and mine is Johnson Lee 42 on both Twitter and Instagram if you want to reach out. But thanks, Mike, for taking time of your busy Hawaii schedule to join me for this conversation. Hope you enjoy the rest of your trip.
Thanks. We're looking forward to it. We're going to go grab brunch now, so that'll be fun. And yeah, Thanks everybody for watching and listening. It's been great to be here. Thank you also to the women at Warp for doing this podcast festival and for inviting us to be a part of it. So thank you to them, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone.